I'm Miss Borderline. Welcome to my channel. Today I'll be bringing you the disturbing case of Ronnie O'Neal III, 33 years old, from Riverview in Florida in the USA. Now, O'Neal brutally murdered his special needs daughter Ronnivia and her mother Kenyatta Barron and attempted to kill their son Ronnie Junior, who miraculously survived to be able to testify against his father in court. Now, before we begin, let me just get this disclaimer out of the way. All the information gathered for this video is freely available on the internet and in media outlets. This video is for educational purposes only and no copyright intended. All the credits are listed in the description. Now, with all those legalities out of the way, let's delve into this case. On March the 18th, 2018, at 11:43 p.m, a chaotic call came into 911 from a female caller begging for help. A man in the background could be heard yelling, Allahu Akbar, which means God is greater. Then the female caller could be heard screaming, I'm sorry, Ronnie, I'm so sorry, Ronnie. Again, a male could be heard in the background saying, she killed me and don't come outside, call 911 now. 8 minutes later, a second 911 came into 911. This was at 11:51 p.m. This time featuring a male caller claiming to have been attacked by a white demon, and accusing Kenyatta, who he addressed as Kiki in the call, of trying to kill him, and that he had just killed her. Ronnie III gave their home address. The first caller was Kenyatta Barron, 33-year-old ex-partner to O'Neal and the mother of his two children. She was actually in school. She was furthering her education, later to be described as a good mum by her son in court. Witnesses have said that O'Neal was actually on top of the roof of the house yelling hours before he actually committed these murders, just before he placed the second call to 911. Deputies arrived at the home at 11:59 p.m. to find a woman, later identified as Kenyatta, lying unconscious in the yard of the home at the mentioned address, and the home was ablaze. She was taken to hospital, where she was pronounced dead soon after, unfortunately. Officers then witnessed young Ronnie Junior stumbling out of the home, badly burned. First responders entered the home and explained how the floor was wet and they kept slipping around and they thought it was water, only to come to find out later that there was actually slipping on blood. Once in the home, they found the burning body of Ronnivia O'Neal, 9 years old. O'Neal became enraged when Kenyatta wouldn't convert her or her children to Islam. Now, O'Neal initially tries to recruit his son to kill his own mother, telling him, come on, let's shoot the bitch. He placed the shotgun in his son's hands and held his hand on the trigger and made him pull the trigger. Luckily, that wasn't the fatal blow. His son, Ronnie Junior, managed to get away and didn't actually see his mum being shot. Barron managed to flee the home and she went into a neighbour's yard. However, O'Neal would follow after her and then beat her on the lawn to death with the barrel of the gun. Now, the couple's daughter, Ronnivia O'Neal, she was just 9 years old. She was non-verbal, she was on the autistic spectrum, and she had cerebral palsy. O'Neal hit her in the back with an axe and then hit her again in the head. Now, this was witnessed by Ronnie Junior, and in his testimony later in court, he said that his father had hit her and he witnessed her eyes roll back and then he saw lots of blood. Now, little Ronnivia, she received fractures to her spine and her spinal cord was actually severed. She had perforation of the larynx, she had a fractured jawbone, bleeding on the brain, burns to total body surface area, but he actually set her on fire after killing her. It was awful. O'Neal then went after Ronnie Junior. Once he managed to get hold of him, He stabbed him multiple times and even attempted to set him on fire. Now, O'Neal was arrested at the scene, obviously taken into custody. He was initially taken into hospital for psychiatric evaluation, and he was found incompetent to stand trial, and he was ultimately admitted for treatment. Ronnie O'Neal was born in 1989. During his childhood, he used to sing in the church choir. He played football. He was also involved with the Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is a military education program. He did struggle in school, but did manage to graduate. I think later on, after school, he tried to join the US Marine Corps, but he failed the entrance exam. He had a kind of minor criminal past for obtaining food or lodging with intent to defraud, marijuana possession, I think driving without a valid licence, but he hadn't actually been arrested for anything since 2009. And it transpired that O'Neal was sexually abused as a child. I think he was 5 years old when this happened, and it was by a family member. Apparently it was a relative of his stepfather, and he didn't receive any treatment for that trauma. Now, O'Neal's brother, Alonzo Kelly, also went on to testify that they were both abused by family members when they were children, and Kelly said that they were both impacted by the abuse, especially O'Neal, like I say, because he was only 5 years old at the time. Now, just a year before these brutal slayings, O'Neal was shot in a random drive-by shooting. It was 2017. It was reported that he flatlined 4 times. On his discharge from hospital, he had nowhere to stay. And puzzling, even family member and friends would not let him stay with them. Now, I'm unsure of why this was, but I have my own inkling. This is my opinion. I think it was because of his mental state. Now, Barron let him stay with her, despite O'Neal's mother warning her against it. So she tried to do a good deed to help out the father of her children, and have him stay with her, only for this horrible thing to happen. Back in 2010, O'Neal had converted to Islam. He was trying to convert Kenyatta and the children as well to the faith. They was not having any of it. Kenyatta did not want to convert, and we believe that this was the catalyst for the killings. This had enraged O'Neal. Combined with his mental state at the time, he carried out the unthinkable. Now, O'Neal was eventually found competent to stand trial in June 2021. So he'd spent 3 years in a psychiatric hospital. When he was discharged from the hospital, and obviously the trial was coming up, he wanted to represent himself. In fact, the judge evaluated him and said he was competent to represent himself, and that's exactly what he did.
You heard Mr. Khalil Brown. You've been hearing me for 2 weeks now, telling you that they committed criminal acts against me with the 911 calls and that fraudulent video that they just showed y'all. Now, I'm going to prove it to you. You heard Khalil Brown. He said that he was actually sure that I only hit Kenyatta Barron 3 times. You heard.
In his opening statement, he shouted, "I look alone, but I am backed by a mighty God." Now, the defence team shared evidence that O'Neal had a psychological condition, which he shared with his biological father. Now, the defence team, that's all they described his mental health condition as, psychological. I did read in my research, O'Neal had PTSD as a result of his childhood trauma, obviously being sexually abused, and also the drive-by shooting. O'Neal shouted his way through the court proceedings. He was extremely loud and verbally aggressive throughout. Ronnie Junior had witnessed his father shoot his mother with a shotgun and hit his sister in the back and the head with an axe, and he was the star witness of the trial. Very brave, such a brave boy, that's all I can say. Very brave boy to go through all of this, to relive that night again. Not only that, but on top of that, to be questioned by his own father, his attacker, the person that was supposed to love him, who attacked him and tried to kill him. He had to sit through and be questioned by this man. On the witness stand, O'Neal asked Ronnie Junior, "Did I hurt you that night?" He said, "Yes." And O'Neal went on to say, "How did I hurt you?" And the little boy just said, "You stabbed me."
Let's bring in our Bo Zimmer, who's covered this trial since the start. And Bo, hearing what little Ronnie said his father did to him and his family that night was really awful.
Absolutely, Ryan. And it was actually very interesting to hear Judge Sisko actually make a point on the record of calling Ronnie O'Neal very competent in his questioning of his son. But that certainly did not make it any easier. Many people in the courtroom fighting back tears as this father came face to face with his own son for the very first time since that alleged attack on his entire family.
I just saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom and mom screaming at him.
The now 11-year-old son of Ronnie O'Neal tells the jury what he remembers from the evening of March 18th, 2018. It's the night O'Neal is charged with gunning down the boy's mother with a 12-gauge shotgun and, according to testimony, even trying to recruit his son to help.
And then my dad said, "Come in here and come kill the B word." And then I went in the room, and then he handed me the shotgun and helped me shoot it.
O'Neal's son recalls his mother running out of the house, but says he stayed inside, telling the jury he never saw his father fire the fatal shot.
And I just saw her she was stumbling outside, and then I just saw my dad chase her.
From there, prosecutors allege O'Neal next turned his attack on his own 2 children.
Did he do something to your sister?
Yes, he hit her with an axe in the head, and then in the back, and the back, and then the head. And then I saw her eyes roll, and then there was blood everywhere.
O'Neal's son, who investigators say was stabbed multiple times and set on fire, next recalled what happened to him.
I was laying on my stomach, he had his foot on top of me, and he was holding me down, and he was lighting a match.
Then came the emotional moment when O'Neal, for cross-examination, came face-to-face with his son for the first time since the attack.
How you doing, Ronnie?
Good.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
O'Neal got to work trying to show inconsistency in his son's previous testimony about his mother's shooting, pointing out he might be an unreliable witness due to PTSD.
And you said, "I heard it and saw it." Do you remember saying that to her?
No, I do not.
And when you gave your interview to Detective Dirks, were you still laying in a hospital bed when that happened?
Yes.
And when you were laying in that hospital bed, did you have tubes in your arms and you were hooked up to some machines and stuff?
Yes.
The judge ultimately offering up an assessment of O'Neal in court.
So I do just want to note that for the record that Mr. O'Neal appeared to be in command of the facts and knew the points that he was trying to get across, and I feel that he did so competently. All right? Thank you.
And that may be more than just a simple compliment that you heard there from Judge Sisko. She was very intentional about putting that on the record, and that could come into play should his competency or lack of representation come into play later in this trial. Guys?
So you heard both.
When Ronnie Junior was recovering in hospital, he struck up a very special bond with one of the first responders that was on the scene. who would go and visit him, sat by his bed for days in, days out. This first responder went on and actually adopted Ronnie Junior, so he was adopted into their family. O'Neal questioned that first responder on the stand, and his opening question surprised everyone. He calmly thanked him for taking in his son, which was a stark contrast to his loud manic outburst in court. The jury were unable to come to a unanimous decision in regards to the death sentence, so O'Neal got life in prison. He was composed and smiling throughout, the judge reading the individual verdicts of the jury. It was just one jury member that opposed to the death sentence. So on July the 23rd, 2021, Ronnie O'Neal III was given 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 90 years. The judge said it was the worst case that she had ever resided over when she sentenced him. She went on to say that she would be haunted by what she had seen throughout the trial for the rest of her life. As a mental health professional, and also someone who has a mental health condition myself as well, watching O'Neal throughout the trial was really difficult. I of course think this was a heinous, disturbing crime, but my mental health side is like, well, where was the help for this man? He had been through significant trauma as a child, and then again as an adult, and yet he still went under the radar. Just a question. I think, is he going to continue to get the mental health support that he needs, locked up in a prison in the US? I'll leave that thought with you. Please consider a like and a subscribe, and join me again soon for another true crime case. Doodaloo!